So in this video we are going to be looking at Microsoft Access. Now Access is probably one of the softwares that gets used the least out of all of the Microsoft Office package, but from a Functional Skills ICT point of view we can't overlook it because it does still come up on the exam syllabus. So we're going to be looking at why we would use Microsoft Access in the first place, and then creating a database and using this to identify data trends. So what that will involve is importing a text file into Microsoft Access, as we have done in some of our other videos with Excel and with Mail Merge, formatting the data types appropriately, producing a query, and then using that to produce a report. So first thing we need to look at is why we would use Microsoft Access. So previously in one of our other videos we looked at Microsoft Excel and we looked at handling data mathematically, and Access is very similar in that we'd use it for data handling tasks. So we're going to be using Microsoft Access to process and work with information, but it's not going to be mathematical data handling like Microsoft Excel would. So we're not going to be calculating totals or percentages or producing graphs and charts and things of such nature. Rather, it's going to allow us to easily access data that meets certain criteria. So it might be that we've got, for example, information on all the people who work in a company, all of the customers who work with us, all of the components that we make. Let's imagine we're like Rolls-Royce, for example, and we're making loads and loads of aircraft bits, nuclear sort of components and things like that. We could produce a database that shows all of the staff members, all of the things we produce, all of our customers that we order from, and we could sort of filter that data down on the fly and constantly in a live sort of manner. So we could have a query set up, one of the things we're going to look at today, wherein everyone who works night shift automatically goes on it. And as we add new data, say a new member of staff starts and they work the night shift, they'll automatically go into that query. So that's more what we use Access for. On a more sort of complex basis, we can have relationships between data sets. So we could have that staff member number 3 worked on component number 5 and that was delivered to customer number 2, for example, and those numbered units would all have information in. But for the purposes of Functional Skills ICT, that's like well above and beyond what we're going to be looking at. It's possibly something we might produce videos on at a later date, but for now we're going to focus on what we need for our Functional Skills ICT exam. So let's have a look at the process from start to finish, so how we'd go about creating our database and working through a very typical level 2 Functional Skills ICT question. During this, I will sort of point out where the level 1 syllabus would sit, because there will be certain elements of that would apply, but a lot of what we're going to look at in this video is more advanced than that. But we will still cover some little bits that will help our level 1 students as well. So when we're working with Microsoft Access, it's quite similar to Excel in a lot of ways, but there are some key differences that can trip you up if you get them wrong as you're working through it. Whereas Excel, when we're working for the Functional Skills ICT level 2 sort of standard, it's a case of remembering what formulas to put in. There's a lot of syntax to remember. Access is more remembering what to press and when, which means some people prefer it, some people find it quite tricky, but once you get to grips with it, it's really not too bad. So from the beginning, the first thing we need to do is we need to save our database before we can physically do anything with it. Because normally you'd create a database and import data into it, you could feasibly import hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sets of data in one go, which would make it too big for the RAM of the computer, which is one of the reasons why, in order to do it, you have to save it first. Now what we're going to do is we're going to single click blank desktop database. Mine's going to take a little while to load because I'm currently recording these from home because of like the situation that's going on at the minute. We're recording these during the COVID-19 pandemic, so it's freaking out a little bit because I can't get on the system. But we're going to single click it because that allows us to define the name of the database and where we're going to save it as well. If we just double click it, it will default it to your My Documents folder with a sequential name. If you look down the side, you can see I've got 33, 34, 35, because I teach this quite regularly remotely. As you can see here, 36 as it pops up. Lots of different sequential things, and when you're doing your exam, that can make it quite difficult to find, and when you have to start moving it about, databases aren't the most portable of things, and they get a bit temperamental. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the little folder button to pick where we're going to save it. From a Functional Skills ICT point of view, you'd proceed to save this somewhere relevant, so your exam folder or something like that, or from a real world point of view, wherever it is you're going to want the database to live, because the less we're going to move it about, the better, really. We're going to give it a relevant name, so I'm going to be using one of our scenarios we give to our level 2 learners, which are based around a boxing gym, so I'm going to call it Fighters Database. And then we're going to create our database. Now, unlike Excel, which has just virtually unlimited cells that go across the rows and down the columns, databases only hold data in set fields, and the fields are the columns that go down as you work. So every single column can be set up to hold a certain kind of data, and every single row of data within that is a record and is like a set of data that fits into those fields. We're not going to create those fields because we're going to import a text file into our database. To do that, we're going to choose external data at the top, and we're going to choose this small text file button. It's important we pick this one, not this larger one over here, because you can see the larger one is over export, and that exports our data as a text file. So it's just going to take this nothingness that we've got in our data at the minute and overwrite our text file with it. In a real world example, that would mean you've lost loads of data, not good. From an exam point of view, you've lost your data file, which means now you can't complete the question. Super not good. So we're going to make sure we pick this little one over here. We'll know we've picked the right one because the first option talks about importing, not exporting. This process is quite similar to what we do with Excel to get a text file into an Excel spreadsheet, and we're going to browse and find our file wherever it may be. So I've saved mine on my desktop, ready, and we choose our relevant text file. We'll leave everything else as it is and press OK. And then one of our other videos, we looked at importing a text file into Excel, and there was only one thing we needed to change, and that was on the second step of the wizard. With Access, there's only one thing we need to change, and that is on the second step of the wizard, because our data here, you can see, is delimited, by which I mean it's split by the same character every time there's a new set of records. So name, comma, age, comma, and that is what's meant by delimited. In a Functional Skills ICT exam, it's always going to be delimited, and it's always delimited by a comma. In a real world example, you might need to tweak that to fixed width if you've tabbed it across into a table, but otherwise leave it as it is. We press next, and unlike Excel where it just doesn't have a clue and you have to set the delimiter, Access is a bit smarter, and it's realised that we've separated it with a comma and it's split it up for us. But it's super important that we tick this first tick box that says first row contains field names, because as you can see, when I tick that, it greys out my first row, and that means that every field going across will be named appropriately rather than just being called field 1, field 2, field 3 and stuff like that, and having name, age and weight as a set of data underneath it. If you don't do this now, there's no way of fixing it. You've got to start this process again, which isn't so bad if you notice it straight away. Bit of a drama if you notice it 20 minutes into your question. So it's super important you tick that tick box. There's lots of other things that this wizard lets you change. It lets you sort out primary keys, which is how we do our relationships within our database and things like that. But we're not going to worry about any of that for our Functional Skills ICT Level 1 or Level 2. So we're just going to press Finish. It's worth noting that this process you only need for Level 2, because at Level 1 they give you the files that you need in the format that you need them. But for a Level 2 Functional Skills ICT exam, you're going to need to do this. What happens when I press OK, as you can see on the left hand side under Tables, we now have a table being created with the file name that our text file had. So mine was called Fighters, so this is called Fighters. And if we double click it, we can see all my data is in there, sort of going down in the rows, and it's split into the fields as per the columns. That's step 1. Now this next bit is going to apply to Level 1 and Level 2 ICT, because at the minute our data is just not formatted correctly at all. We can see my ages are all left aligned, we've got zeros and ones here, and we're going to need to format what we call our data types in our design view. A lot of the more advanced stuff in Access relies on those data types being set correctly, and even at Level 1 standard, your data is going to look rubbish if it's in the wrong type. To change these, we need to go into our design view, so we're going to go to the Home tab and use this very first button, and we can either hit the top half or the bottom half, but just make sure we're picking design view. Here you can see all the fields we had across the top, and now we're in my first column, and every single one has a data type attached to it. In your exam, it'll either tell you specifically what to set them as, so it'll say set, for example, set age as number, or it will say just set them appropriately. And if it says to just set them appropriately, it will normally be painfully obvious. So you'll have prices, for example, that need setting as currency. You'll have dates that need setting as date and time. If you're unsure, don't change it, because you can break stuff by setting these wrong. Like if I set name as currency, it's going to freak out and delete all the data. We're going to set my age as number and my registered as yes and no. Yes and no might also be referred to as logical in some of the older papers or in some older reference materials if you're using some external textbooks or something like that. Because in the old versions of Access it was called logical because it's zeros and ones, but they've renamed it as they've sort of revamped Office to yes and no. Once I've got all that set up, we're going to save it in the top left using the floppy disk icon, because you need to save it anytime some changes are made. And it'll warn me that some of my data may be lost, because like I said, if I've set name as percentage or whatever, that's not even a data type, but you get my point, it'll freak out and it'll go wrong. We know we've done it properly, so we can press yes, and if I press my view button, which now looks different, my data looks a lot better. From a level 1 ICT point of view, all you're going to need to do from here is manipulate this data, so literally typing over it. So it might be, for example, that it would say, oh, Alex Autumn isn't a heavyweight, he's actually a flyweight. If I could spell flyweight, there we go, flyweight, or something like that. Or it might say to you, oh, Anthony Roberts is no longer registered, and you have to just change it as it says. Level 1 access, that's it, simple as that. All of the rest of the complex stuff only comes up in level 2. From a level 2 point of view, all we've got left to produce from here is a query and a report. Now a query is like a more powerful version of the filter in Microsoft Excel, and we use that to only show data that meets certain criteria. So in the example I gave at the start, I said you could have all the people that work for you, and a query set up to only show people that are on night shift, for example. A report basically takes that and makes it look pretty on a piece of paper. You cannot make a report that only holds certain data without making a query first, and that's important because in the live exam what they like to do is sort of not tell you to create the query and just say create a report that only shows artificial flowers, for example, but that'd be impossible without doing a query first, so that's just something to bear in mind. The query and the report are both made on the Create tab, and we're going to create our query first. That's a tongue twister, I'm really proud of myself for saying that, but we're going to create our query first, and we're going to use query design because the wizard's rubbish. So if we produce our query, it'll ask us what table we want to show. We've only got one table that's got any data in it, so we're going to show it and then close the big box. Worth noting, if you accidentally add more than one of those tables, it's not going to work, and what you'll get is instead of having, for example, we're going to end up with 2 people when I finish this query, it will have those 2 people looped infinitely. So if you accidentally add more than one, right click the duplicate at the top and press remove table. What they like to do in this instance is ask you to only include fields in your query that won't let you do what you need to do. So for example, we're going to produce a query from this data that only shows Southpaws, so we know we need stance, because that's where Southport is, that are registered. So we know we're going to need registered, because we can't do any criteria or any filtering without adding the fields that we need. So if I didn't put stance in, for example, into my query, so if I didn't double click it and make it appear at the bottom here, I couldn't use that to then filter my query down. Just like if I wanted to be registered, if I don't have registered in there, it ain't going to work. But what they like to do in the exam is they'll say, show only the Southpaw fighters who are registered. Only show their name, age and weight. So what a lot of people do in the exam is, you know, they'll freak out and they'll forget and they'll go, oh, I only need to add name, age and weight. Oh, I can't make it work. And that is because you've not got the relevant fields. You can't check if they're Southpaw and you can't check if they're registered if you don't include them. The way around that is any that it tells you not to include, so for in our case stance and registered, we're going to untick. So you can see down the left hand side at the bottom, this is basically our query, and each bit is labelled. So we've got the field, the table it's in, whether we want to sort it, whether we want to show it, and our criteria. So because we only want to show name, age and weight, we're going to untick stance and untick registered as well, like so. Now, that's all well and good, but we need to put our criteria in. So the row underneath the tick boxes is labelled criteria, and we can type underneath the relevant field and put in whatever our criteria may be. The criteria might be a specific word. So for example, we were only looking for Southpaws, so when I type in Southpaw, it comes up in speech marks. That means it's looking for that specific word. So obviously if you spell it wrong, it won't work, so just something to bear in mind. Using yes and no, we can use commands. So for example, yes, because it's a yes and no field, it understands. You can also use numbers, so it might be, for example, say I want it under 25 years old. I do it the same way I do it in Excel with my less than and more than signs. So here we have less than 25, so it'll only show people under 25. There's some more advanced stuff you can use, so we could have between 18 and 25, for example, but it's very rare that you'd need that, if ever, in your functional skills exam. It's either going to be type in a specific word, type in a command, or less than or more than numbers, or dates as well. So if you wanted before the 1st of April 2020, for example, you'd go less than the 1st of April 2020, and that's how that would work. Pretty much you can type almost anything and it'll probably work, but those are the main ones that you're going to need for your exam, so remember those. We've set this up now to only show Southpaw people who are registered, And so now, if I use the run button, in my instance, I should end up with 2 blokes, like so. If nothing comes up here, so for example, let's say I spelled Southpaw wrong, nothing will come up. That's our clue that something's gone wrong. So make sure if you're looking for a specific word, we spell it correctly, and we can run it. To get back to my query, I'm only pressing the design view button, the same as I did in my table, and that lets me make any changes should I need to. What you might encounter, if you left your table in design view, is that when you try and run your query, it won't let you. And this error message will come up. So if you get an error message that your table is already opened exclusively by another user, then what has happened is, if you go to the tab at the top for your table, you've left it on this. Put it back to normal, and then you should find that it lets you run your query as normal. A little bit of troubleshooting for what might come up in the exam. So we've got our query. Now, whatever we save this as is going to be the title for the report that we then produce from it. So we need to call it something appropriate. So I'm going to save this as registered Southpaws, like so. And we have to save our query before we can do anything with it. All that's left to do here is create our report, and this is like the easiest thing on the Functional Skills ICT syllabus. Because we're going to create, and we're going to use Report Wizard. Because like I was saying earlier, all the report does is takes this query and makes it look pretty on a piece of paper. Nice and simple. When we open up our Report Wizard, we want to make sure that our table/query is the query we produced, because that's what we want to show on the report. And once we've done that, we're going to add all of our fields using the double chevron. Now, as we go through this, there's lots of options for sorting, grouping, and things like that. But we're probably not going to need those, because if we're sorting something, we've probably already sorted it in the query. So what we're going to do is we're going to blast the next button, and then go back one. Now, this next bit is more functional skills based rather than like real world application, but we're going to set the layout as columnar and the orientation as landscape. And I'll demonstrate why here. So, in our instance, we've only got 3 columns, so 3 sets of records and 2 sets of data within it. So the odds are, however we sort of format it, it's going to fit on a page. But let's say we had loads and loads of different bits of information. If I hit finish, we can see it produces my report, nice and simple, basically sets it out so it can print it like so. But let's say I've got loads and loads of data and it doesn't fit. I've then got to go and close my print preview and play with the design view of a report, which as we can see isn't the most ergonomic thing in the world. So we want to try and avoid that as best as we can, which is why we choose columnar, because what that means is instead of displaying your records across the top and your fields across the top and your records going down, it displays your fields and records vertically, so that even if you had like 20 fields that you were displaying, they'd all fit. Setting it as landscape just gives you that little bit more opportunity as well, where if you've got like really long sets of data like addresses and things like that, they're going to fit. That start to finish is a worst case scenario level 2 access question. Admittedly, not the most common software to use out of the Office package, because normally in a sort of company sort of setting, if you've got a database, you've probably had one produced bespoke to what you're doing, or you're using a piece of software. For example, at Learning Unlimited, we use a software called EBS to track all of our student data, because that's what that's literally designed for, rather than having someone like me make it and rely on it as a company. But for your Functional Skills ICT exam, it's worth noting this, because you've probably never used it, you're probably not going to be able to blag it, and if it comes up, you don't want to be losing out and failing the exam because of something rare coming up that you weren't prepared for.